and welcome back to Waaaghtaktiks. We're here to talk about Zodgrod, how to use Zodgrod Wortsnagga. So, my boy here used to be quite a contentious model, kind of looked down upon when he first came out on the scene. Yet here we are in Pariah Nexus, where scouting is king, infiltrators reign supreme, and the orcs only have one of those kings. So today, I'm going to talk to you and actually show you how we would use Zodgrod Wortsnagga. I'm going to give you a couple scenarios here. I'm actually going to have some pictures that I laid out on my personal tabletop with some of my personal models to actually give you full-on examples of each of these scenarios and what to do, what not to do. Of course, things in the pictures may be easier to complete than may appear in an actual game, but you know, these are things, the best way I can really describe this to you by giving you examples. So today we're going to talk about those Zodtactics. But before we talk about Zodtactics, let's talk about today's sponsor, the Baron of Dice. They're here to help us with our paint competition, so thank you for that. Of course, check out our discount in the description code for 5% off. Nobody likes taxes, and thank you for Baron of Dice for providing these awesome dice that are very beautiful, have great texture, and allow us to do our paint competition. Now back to Zodtactics. So real quick, just in case you're a straight up new player, I want to give you, of course, as much starting information as possible. I have other videos discussing Zod. He's talking about often and somewhat, but let me give you some ideas. That way you can kind of get caught up, right? Zodgrods uses and the detachments that I more likely would see him in, right? So right off the bat, Zod is our only scouting unit. It is a great utility in Nexus as a whole, as Nexus greatly favors melee pressure armies, a lot of Gothic ruins, a lot of places to stage up and not be shot, to even deny Overwatch. Therefore, having board presence as early as possible, because GW has kind of stuck us in the back corner of our deployment zone sometimes, we're going to be using our scouts. The other thing about Zod, as a second point, is he's actually excellent at hunting down infiltrators, scoring units, or screens that, you know, we could shoot them with pistols, because he gives the pistols +1 to wound also, or he's just straight up good at punching them away, as he's deceitfully punchy with his grot unit. Now, of course, on the WAAAGH, they get up to strength 3. Zod gives them +1 to hit and +1 to wound. Of course, you can stack that strength with something like a kill rig to become strength 4. People will never appreciate it until it's in their face clapping them. But that does work, as Zod himself is a clapping unit where he can kill half or a whole Space Marine Scout unit, for example. So if someone doesn't respect your, grots, something like mandrakes, you'll automatically destroy them. It's hilarious. Next, we have Tar Pit. Okay, Zod can end up just all the amount of bodies he's at, something for like a Thunderwolf Cavalry, 8-bound, stuff like that, screening for alpha strikes. Obviously, Zod works in that, but I'm going to actually give you pictures and descriptions on a scenario where you may do this. Then you have wrapping or tagging. In this case, we're talking about something like a Land Raider, something like a Repulsor. Of course, something like a Repulsor, you can actually do straight up damage to it with Zod's unit. Zod himself will wound it on 4s. The grots themselves can be wounding it on 5 with their pistols, which actually does stack up when you're shooting 20 pistols at something. And then the Run Herder's pistols as well, and Zod's pistol, those are 23 shots, all of them +1 to hit, all of them +1 to wound. Yes, you can tear 6 wounds off a Repulsor and not even be surprised about it with your shooting. Then you have Battlefield Initiative. What do I mean by that? I mean that you now have control of certain points and positions in the battlefield where you can dictate ingresses or strategic reserves, or if someone has the ability to obviously pick themselves up and put a best on the battlefield, right? Zod being able to get to one of these 4 corners faster than other units, then of course you need to have Zod for that mention as well. And then someone in chat brought up the Zod with the truck. I'll just mention that right off the bat, that Zod can of course be embarked into a transport. That transport, a dedicated transport only, meaning our orc truck, will now adopt the scout keyword. For those of you that are in contention, thinking that a transport turns off your unit's abilities, that is true, such as flash kits, if they can't get their additional shot, stuff like that, loot is re-rolling. You don't get that, but this does not apply for scout. Therefore, your scouting truck, your dedicated transport truck, can adopt the scouting keyword. And of course, that will work too. Another one brought up in the chat right now that I should touch on before I get into my pictures is, yes, if you scout and then you end up on the objective, then you can end up rolling for CP on that objective as well, because now it has been changed to not in the command phase, but it's at the start of the movement phase. Therefore, after you've scouted, if you can scout onto objective, you can roll for that CP as well. Of course, this is a live video demonstration where I like to give examples. Therefore, of course, participate in chat. That way I don't forget anything for any of you cunning gits that come back to this video. Then the detachments I favor with Zodgrod Wortsnagga, not in my precise order, but Warhorde is actually pretty dang good for Zodgrod. That's where he actually found his first love. He found his first place in Zodgrod Wortsnagga, okay? So Zodgrod can have access to critical 5+ for sustain, like we spoke about before. That can become crazy because you could put kill rigs. If he's within range of Gaz, that means that whole Grot unit can now take benefit from Gaz's lethal critical 5s. Sustain. Of course, there's sometimes better units like knobs on your go turn to use that, but I'm just giving you an example. Let's play a 1K game. Yes, your Zod unit can go crazy and just blow someone up with just some punching. It's hilarious. They can get +2 to advance and charge because you just pick an Ork unit. And yeah, an Ork infantry unit. So of course they can do that. Becomes excellent mobility as Zod does move fast. But speaking of moving fast, Zod moves extra fast on the Dread Mob. Now, why is that excellent? Because the conniving Grot stratagem allows you to just move your Grot's movement as a reactive move. Well, Zodgrod's Grot unit, the super runts, will now be moving 12 inches. That means now you've scouted 9 inches. But then if someone comes within range of you, ready to fight you, and it's a WAAAGH turn, you can now move 12 inches, sometimes into them, sometimes away from them. Of course, we can all understand when you would run away from someone to deny charges, stuff like that as a bait. Yeah, we're actually going to give an example of when you would reactive move maybe even closer to them. And I'll actually show you why you might want to do that. Then we have Green Tide. Now, the reason Green Tide actually work with Zod is because it fits the theme of the list, and it adds a bit of speed utility. Of course, all the boys get the invulns, but boys are straight up slow. And when you're running a Green Tide, typically you maybe only have one battle wagon or none at all. Therefore, having something like Zod to go early, play the game, set up on your natural expansion objective, meaning the objective closer to you, or you can go harass the enemy's natural expansion objective because your boys are slow enough to kind of advance, yet go tag your natural expansive objective anyways. Or maybe you just jump over there with your weird boy, right? The point is Zod gives the utility of speed and control of the battlefield, which typically Green Tides don't have. And that's actually how you blow apart a Green Tide, is you're just faster than it and choose to dictate the battles. Well, Zod helps you kind of offset some of that, right? Of course, because the boys already have the WAAAGH durability, and you still want some kind of durability to Zod, you don't want to call a WAAAGH just for Zod all the time. But in some cases, you might actually go to ground. The reason I bring that up is you might have CP in Warhorde, Green Tide, Bully Boys, Cult of Speed, whatever detachment you're doing. Going to ground with Zodgrod's units is the most exceptional, excellent way to use go to ground stratagem, as giving that unit of 6 up invuln really does make a difference outside of the WAAAGH turn. Of course, not always going to be applicable, but those 1 in 5, 1 in 10 games, it might come up, especially in a smaller game. So now, guys, I'm actually going to give you the presentation of the scenarios that I've just covered and maybe how I'd handle them or how you would see them, perceive them. Maybe you're a new player, maybe you're not too familiar, maybe I'm trying to sell you on Zod. Then you would hopefully gain something from this. If you're an exceptional player and you already understand some of these things, you may know, but of course we like refreshes and we all love 40K. So in the presentation I'm going to have you with these pictures, I'm going to be using GW Layout 2 with Search and Destroy. So here's a presentation of how that looks in a nice, beautiful, orderly fashion. Now, this is how it looks on my beautiful, orderly fashion table. Of course, some of these terrain pieces, you can see the far middle terrain that looks like a tiny little terrain piece. That's because I wanted this to be open. That way we can actually look around the battlefield and see where stuff is when I try to give you the presentation. If you ever see the base and there's not a terrain on it, you can simply refer back to this picture, and this picture will tell you what terrain is supposed to be there, because I am going to be moving the terrain in these presentations. That way you can get direct placement on where these things are going to end up. For example, in this picture I'm showing you, there's Imperial Fist hiding in that building. In my presentation, I'm going to be moving those buildings around. That way you can see what's actually hiding there and staging and such, okay? So keep this in mind. If you're ever following along, this is a very visual presentation from this point on, then you might want to refer back to this slide. and then understand what terrain is where. So now we move on. I'm going to just go through it quickly. With scouting, know where you want to end up. In this example I have you here, there's a 9-inch widget. There's also a widget staged up in the corner of that terrain up there. Then I have the big yellow and green bar. That bar is the deployment zone. If you look at the 2 squares, which are for the actual terrain layout, these are in place so that you, one, cannot get shot from this position. And 2, you are now pre-measuring as to this is the final outcome where I can move from my scout, and this is how far away I have to be from the wall to not get charged, my ground unit charged if I'm staging here. What I need you to understand as an Ork player using Zod is you're not really going to WAAAGH turn 1, and you're not really going to always want to expose him turn 1. This is a neutral deployment scouting that we're starting with in my presentation right now. Of course, we're going to go into the other exceptions. This is one where the enemy's not alpha striking you. Maybe it's a shooting matchup. You're staging for your turn 2. So keep that in mind. That's the context of what we're showing in this presentation here. I will, of course, get to the other ones as we continue on. Now, this is right after they've scouted. What am I doing here? My scouting thoughts. 1, I'm scouting into safety. You can simply see my unpainted widget is right in front of Zod in order to retain that 1-inch spacing so that the enemy cannot end up there, but also cannot be in contact with me and fight me through the wall. I'm really much trying to be safe here. Of course, you can see some of these models are off the little plexiglass terrain layout. Those guys cannot be seen, and the ones that are in terrain hypothetically should be hidden from that wall. Of course, guys, I know there's windows. I know there's a little edge there. If you're playing on proper terrain, then that's cover up. If you're playing with your friends, people understand that too. Carry on. What I've done here is now I've minimalized 1, what can shoot them, and 2, what can actually engage with them encounter, right? So the notes I have here are scout into safety most of the time, guys, because you're staging for a WAAAGH turn 2 or 3, most of the time 2. You're often with Zod playing the side objectives a little bit more, as in natural expansion or the enemy's natural expansion, meaning closest objective to you or the closest objective to the enemy. There are cases where you will play the center, but you're going to play the center wisely. Usually you'll know that just based off the enemy's list when you see it, right? We'll talk about that when we go on. But again, you're not turn 1 WAAAGing very often. Now, 2, what I've done in this picture that you're seeing here, now that I've actually moved, if you look at that bottom piece of terrain, that was the terrain I was actually staged up in. Where Zod is currently and where that Grod is currently is 13 inches away from where I was positioned because I gave myself a 1-inch advance. Of course, you guys can give yourselves, you might get more than that, or you might not even advance because you want to shoot your super powerful grot pistols. Maybe there's a scout hanging out somewhere out in the middle of the battlefield, a leftover unit you want to chip, a transport you want to whatever. Sure, shoot your grot pistols at that. That way, that's why I minimalize the distance here. That way, you guys don't always advance because sometimes the pistols are really strong. In this case, you can see 1, an enemy unit is actually staged in that deployment. I have moved the piece of terrain, but right there's a nice, beautiful L piece of terrain. I put aggressors there and hellblasters. Simply, this is going to show a threatening enemy unit. It can be shooting, it can be fighting, whatever it may be. I'm just putting it there as a visual representation. On the right, I moved my big piece of terrain. That way, guys, you can actually see what's there. Put a little ugly green wall there. That's normally an L-shaped terrain. And right there you have, that could be someone's infiltrators, another scout unit, whatever it is. These were the initial unit that was tagging that objective. From this point of view, right away where I have this picture on screen, there's multiple courses of action you can have here. Whether it's a shooting army or a melee army will dictate exactly how you will handle this. But what you need to gather from this positioning is, A, all those aggressors now have directly been blocked from walking through that wall. Whether I charge or not, they can simply not walk into the middle of the board, and they will have to back around and head either towards Zod, or they're going to have to head towards the top left corner of this picture where that enemy objective, where that middle objective marker is. That would be, they would need an advance because, of course, aggressors only move 5 inches. So they can't fully clear that wall because your grots are all right there. They cannot get within an inch of them, and they cannot pass through them. You are now dictating where these aggressors can actually go, whether they're killing Zod's unit or not. Doesn't matter. If this is a unit that you're scared to charge because they will simply kill too many of them, it's a whole bunch of we'll say fight first, assault intercessors with their Judiciar or whatever, right? And you can't actually touch them with Zod because they'll clap you back and kill you pretty hard. In this case, you're just going to stand right in the way of them. These guys have nowhere to go but either back around towards Zod or back around towards that middle objective. In this case, if you're running Dread Mob, this is where loot has come into play and will start to Overwatch if you're forcing enemies to the middle objective. When we covered on WAAAGH Wednesday, when people say they forced enemies onto the objectives, it's in maneuvers like this, right? If they wanted to allow them to move on to objective 4, you simply wouldn't place Zod there. You place them further back so the reactive enemy has to kind of move into the open to get overwatched, whatever it may be. The point here is that you don't actually have to charge. You have now already blocked out the center enemy object unit, and you've now dictated where they'll go for the rest of the turn. You can now stage positionally, whether that's a punchy melee unit or a shooting unit, because you know where it's going to end up moving, and it's not going to be directly towards you. Of course, that sniper unit that we have on the right, the eliminators, those guys are free to get charged. Of course, you could put Zod over there and charge them. If they're a low punching OC unit, maybe it's a shooting unit. In this case, you can tag them with Zod and simply still retain that line you have right there. If you want, you can just charge that unit now with Zod. Only Zod will charge maybe a couple Grots because Grots can actually get within that 1 inch, so they have to get into combat. That's why sometimes in this case, you don't actually have to charge. One thing to remember, occupying space is king. You're denying deep strikes here. You're denying maybe jump pack units from flying straight up over your screens. That's why I've actually done coherency down with this unit. From right off the bat, if you're looking at a picture, it just looks like one big double line of Grots. It's not. If you follow that red Grot down towards the bottom left where that terrain is on this picture, the runt herders that are clearly missing from this unit are hiding in that terrain piece. Why would I do that? Because if I'm not choosing to charge anyways, I'm not using the runt herders' offensive potential, I am absolutely maximizing their ability to have cover when the enemy does respond. Like I said, when the aggressors do walk out into there, if they have Flamestorm gauntlets, if they have, I guess they get additional AP. If they have, and maybe you don't have the wall, whatever. If they have Stormbolters, if it's a Stormbolter Terminator Assault unit, for example, your run herders are going to be taking the cover saves from within that terrain piece, even though your Grots are right in the front face getting shot. Way better cover save, way better armor saves, and you'll retain a bunch of Grots from something like Stormbolters. So remember, coherency is much longer than you realize. Really take advantage of that. And like I said in this picture, right, that 1 inch you're denying from the walls. From here, you can charge whatever the enemy unit is, but you're denying that. That's the big case here. Oops, a wall, right? Now, on this next example we're giving is deny enemy alpha strike. So a few points here, which I covered up myself on accident with our logo. Scouts cannot get within 9 inches of other enemy units. That means other scouts. That means infiltrators, right? So what do you do in that case? Well, scout around enemies if you cannot go forward. What do I mean by that? Now, in this picture, I do have a lot of little widgets and things on screen because we're going to go through a couple things here that I want to point out. More pictures will follow to clear things up. One, you can clearly see this unit at the top is one of those nice, big, fancy Gene Stealer alpha striking bombs. You could pretend this is a World Eaters 8-bound unit. Whatever you have to imagine in your head this is, it works very much the same or similarly, right? What you're looking at here is, one, these guys are faster. We'll pretend they win first, and they're actually going to end up moving into us in this example. But in this case, they've actually already scouted first. So now you can see with my black widget there, they're a little greater than 9 inches away from me. That means my Grots can't really move forward. So what have I done with my scout move? Well, my tape measure is right there. And that, like I said earlier, green and yellow bar that I have across that bottom right of the screen, that's the deployment line. The tape measure is showing you I have scouted my Grots simply to the right a couple inches, maybe 5 inches or so. I could clean up the coherency there. But I have moved them a little bit to the right. The reason I've done that is because I am stopping those flash skits from now getting close enough to being piled in or consolidated into, which I'll show you another example. But I've done that for both of my flash skits unit that are on the top of my deployment and on the bottom of the deployment. And I've done that by simply scouting my units out and around in almost like a U-shaped pattern to stop this Gene Stealer friend from going, oh, well, you circled a little to the bottom. Well, I'm just going to run to the top of that, and then I'm going to charge you from the top down. This gives you that nice U shape that you can actually take advantage of, right? We'll talk about more what I mean by that, but things to keep in mind from this point. One, you can fully extend the screen, but 2, if the enemy does have good shooting, in this case the Gene Stealers do, because they would have something like the Neurothropes in the background. In that case, you have to actually not overextend yourself, so when you start to pull casualties, you don't create gaps in your line. But with that being said, you should be helping set up your Overwatch if this enemy unit does have its own shooting and response, or if it's a big old dumb unit like this Gene Stealer unit, right? This unit is highly susceptible to being shot by Ludas or flash kits. But if it's something like an 8-bound unit, they're a much smaller profile. You may not gain line of sight to them. So that's where you can actually extend and fully cover. Because remember, 8-bound can auto advance 6. So they have great mobility. Therefore, you want to scout further along. That way they have to kind of interact with you. Now here, reactive move to deny the bad touch. So let's say you didn't take my advice number 1, or the enemy was too good. Maybe there was not enough space. Whatever the circumstances are, I'm not judging you, but let's try to fix it. So now we're going to have picture 1 and picture 2. Now, what I'm demonstrating in picture 1 is that the placement of the grots right now, if the Gene Stealer person is wise at combat, at charging, what they can simply do is charge into the grots. You can see where the widget is from the front of that grot to my end of my front of my flash kit. It's only 4 inches away. That means when this Gene Stealer unit charges, so it's going to touch my grot, it's going to make about an inch for that when everybody moves in and piles in. When they pick up this grot unit, then they're going to consolidate into my flash kits unit. They have now done a bad touch. Of course, we like to do that, but Ork players don't like when it happens to them, especially if they're using shooting armies or if they're using units that are kind of big in the back of the unit, like an Ork mob. Let's say boy mob gets touched, bad touch, for example, not near your power claws. You might just got bad touch like that. Now your unit's stuck in place. It can happen to us too. So how do you stop that? Well, you stop that with image number 2. Image number 2 is what happens when I have now simply done a reactive move as the enemy has moved into range of me. With this reactive move, I've moved a little closer and up around the Gene Stealers, meaning that when they charge me, they can simply go into base to base with my front of my grot unit. The front of my grot unit's beyond that 4 inches. After doing its reactive move, still staying an inch away. That's why I have the brown widget there on screen showing the demonstration that you still need to be an inch away from your enemy, yet you can go around them. That way they cannot make up space with the charge. That means when they charge, they can't pile in and then pile in around their grot that's now around their Gene Steal that's now based, and then bad touch and get closer to you. You've now denied their ability to bad touch you, even if they kill all of your grots in your screen, even if they pile in and consolidate, because you've not given them that space. And you can see with the widget that I am greater than 4 inches away. Therefore, you won't be getting into combat. So that's how you deny with the reactive move from being bad touched, but you actually go forward into the enemy unit. A lot of the time people talk about going backwards. Of course, we all understand the notion of going backwards. You're either going into safety so you can't get shot. You're going into a building so they can't get within 1 inch of you and get into combat. Maybe you're pulling yourself off an objective so they don't get rerolls. Maybe you're getting closer to your own heroic intervention. These are all cases where you can reactive move backwards. But I figured it was better to show a demonstration of reactive moving closer to the enemy. Now this is circumstantial, and as you can see, this mostly happened because I already messed up earlier, or you or me, whatever player did this, earlier by even having these units this close to it. You could have made space with scouting. But sometimes as the game go on, this can still come into play. Now we're going to show when I talked about wrapping or clapping. In this presentation, beginning of what I'm showing you here, that big piece of terrain is the big center piece of terrain that, in this case, Zod has moved closer to you. We can say either you had commandos to offset their infiltrators, or they didn't have infiltrators because for whatever reason they didn't bring them because they're not watching our Waaaghtaktiks videos. So they didn't bring infiltrators. You feel really good with Zod here. You figure I'm just going to go forward my typical 12 inches. This is the wall now, right? We've already talked about you staged, you move up. You moved up all your grots cleanly into this building. You're not giving away free casualties. Now here comes the move 12 inches. In this picture, I'm simply showing grot moving 12 inches. Of course, you can roll the advance and you would get further, which I would give myself a 2-inch advance when I put the demonstration where I put these models down next. So in this case, you can see I'm roughly 4 inches away from this impulsor. This impulsor can be a land raider, it can be a rhino, it can be a plague burst crawler, it can be a mini marine transport, whatever you want to call it, right? In this case, how it's being placed, this is more of a gun line position where it's further back. If this was a Land Raider Redeemer, it'd be much closer. You can pull this off possibly easier, but you'd even Overwatch. There's other circumstances there, but I actually wanted to pull this further away. That way we can talk about how to do other things. So right here, Zod's 4 inches away. You're close enough to this enemy unit that you have to be fearful. You've run straight up to the middle. That's fine. Here's how you're set up now. Oh, sorry. I went early to one, right? From this point, you can either A, choose to charge his enemy unit, try to get some kills, hold the middle position, create a boundary, blah, 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 right? That's up to you to dictate, but that's the easy answer. We're going to pretend that unit inside that objective is a brutally punchy unit that you don't really want to get combat with, and they're Space Marines, so they can fall back, shoot, and charge, so you don't see yourself giving away casualties for no reason. So in this case, you're going to run into that enemy vehicle / transport. You're only 4 inches away. You're very confident in this. So let's say you roll a nice 7-inch charge. That's mathematically average on dice. You can say yourself a 6, whatever it may be. Remember, this position I gave myself, this is only 12 inches. I didn't give myself the 2 inches yet. I gave it from the charge. So I gave myself a 7-inch charge when I moved this out. It could be further because you could roll in advance here and end up even closer than I was after I pre-measured Zod. So excuse me, I could have done that a little cleaner. I get better at this as we do it. So you can actually end up closer than this picture is presenting you, but right now it's only a 4-inch charge based off that widget right there to get Zod into combat. Yet, how would this actually look? So what I've actually done in this picture, and I want to present, this is hard to show you without having a live demonstration, but I'm going to try to speak this out for you because this is all love. This is where you get cunning but brutal. This is where we are actually looking to wrap this transport and create space to actually move and steal his home objective, which your Grots have now ended up on. How did I do this? How did this move this direction? What I want you to look at, if you're looking and not watching, is I have placed these little red squares between my Ork units, each model, excuse me, that have gone around this transport. Why have I done this? This is called intentionally blocking yourself on the charge. So as the rules are written with how charging works now in 40K, is that you have to end into base-to-base contact if you can. Therefore, how do I get around this? I want shenanigans. I want to move freely and pile in and consolidate onto that objective. So how did I do that? How'd you do that, Eddie? What I did is I intentionally took the runt herders, which have 32 mil bases, and I took some of the grots, which I gave you demonstration here, and I've simply moved them just far enough that a grot base cannot fit there, and I've created space. Therefore, other grot units that have now ended up getting base to base, when I pulled them from that charging unit closer to this impulsor, they've now boxed out the next row of grots. Now, keep this in mind for you gits that are going to try this. It is best of you to pull the further away grots first. Meaning, in this picture, I've gone back one picture, and I have these 3 rows of grots. I'm actually, once I've pulled my charge and gotten closer, I'm pulling the grots that can barely get within 6 inches to the front of that impulsor, which is that run herder. As you can see, these run herders, they were barely within range of getting where they ended up, right here in front of that impulsor. I've done that intentionally. I pulled the further back guys forward to get within 6 inches. That way, the guys that are in the front line with Zod right here, these front 4 grots that are right behind Zod, these guys are the ones that I want to move freely. As the runt herders move forward, and as the second row of grots moves forward first, when I'm picking up my models in the order of operations, when I finish my successful charge, I'm picking up the further models so that I can end up just in base-to-base contact with that transport. That means this front row of grots that is behind Zod now, because they've been blocked off by the other grots, and because I've placed other runt herders and other units that I could in the way of them, now they can move freely as long as they end closer or as close as possible to the enemy unit that was charged. Therefore, I moved Zod and I moved the Grots behind him. And when I did my pile in, my Grots couldn't fit in where these red gaps are and couldn't fit where that Grot blocked them off, but they still had to get into combat because they could. They simply utilized their 3-inch pile in and 3-inch consolidate to end up on that objective. Therefore, they now tie this objective. If this was a land raider with 5 OC, if it was anything less, they would have stolen this home objective or whatever objective they may be. So I know that was a little bit to unpack, hard to actually explain without live showing you. So I'm going to sum it up one time very quickly again, and hopefully it makes enough sense. I've started here exactly 12 inches away from my starting position of safety after I scouted and I staged up for turn 1. This is now turn 2. I am now moving. This is a pre-measure of Zod moving simply 12 inches. You can see I'm about 4 to 5 inches away from the impulsor already. That's not including any advance rolls. Or here we go, for example. Now I've moved my units forward that 12 inches. This is not even with rolling in advance. That means you could have ended up even closer. From here, let's say I rolled a 6 or 7 inch charge. From this point of view, guys, now that I've already rolled my charge, you are pulling the second row of Grots that can barely complete the charge, yet get to base and base contact with this impulsor. They are going first. They are going first to intentionally move block yourself so that your other Grots can now freely move, but end up as close as possible to the enemy unit to get into combat. Meaning that second row of Grots and a couple of those first row of Grots have actually gone up, based the enemy model, yet made space there so your own Grots cannot fit there. Therefore, your Grots can move freely, and as you maximize your pile in to consolidate, you can move your Grots around the edges and either fully encapsulate this transport. Let's say there's a Terminator inside of it. That's why I have a little silly Terminator there. Let's say the Terminator inside it and there's a Land Raider. You don't have to blow it up. They can't disembark if it's not blown up, and enemies cannot disembark when the transport has fallen back. Therefore, you can simply deny an enemy's disembarkation by wrapping it, even if you're not clapping it, right? So even if you're not killing and outright clapping this transport or Land Raider, whatever you want to call it, wrapping it and denying the disembarkation of enemy infantry, whether that's because it has to fall back or because you've created gaps around it completely, is how you successfully wrap a transport and take advantage of Zod in that way. Touching the enemy objective is just a secondary aspect of that. It was just a good opportunity to show you how you could and would do that, because a lot of the time, whether it's mini Marines, Eldar, Space Marines, they'll use their rhinos, their gladiators, their Land Raiders, whatever it may be, to stand on objectives to kind of double down and secure OC. That's where you can actually use it to their disadvantage by either wrapping it or charging it and maximizing your big blob's ability to block itself and end up on the enemy's home objective. That is a more intermediate or high level skill, but as you start to question it more, practice it more, talk to other people, you'll be able to do that. It works excellent with Ork boy mobs. If you haven't seen our Ork boy mob video, we present it there as well with another great player from Peter, and so you can check that out as well. It's a demonstration that you must understand as an Ork player if you're using units that are above 10 models, because that's really how you maximize our blobs of cheap chaff. So guys, that's it for my rendition of Zod Tactics. So hopefully this was actually a bit more informative. It kind of helped you as newer players to understand where I want you to position Zod, things to look out for when you are positioning Zod. And of course, like I said, doing stuff like reactive moves, throttling his movement, killing, all of those things are things we regularly talk about the channel. We have a bunch of other videos talking about that. This video was very much about me showing you positionally wise where Zod should end up and what you're actually trying to do with him, if you're not just straight up doing the basic maneuvers of hey, I'm going to run right at you and then wrap you because you're in the middle of the table. Or if it's not something very obvious, like I'm going to go and just stand in your way, or I'm going to reactive move off an objective, right? Those are all things that I know you kind of picked up as you played Zod, but this is that next level of play-by-play, intermediate play of how you would use Zod's unit. So chat, before I log off, if you guys have anything to say that I didn't cover, thank you for pointing out, of course, that Zod can, in fact, scout in a dedicated transport. It's not something that we've seen competitively done very often, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. So, of course, you could do it. And the last thing I want to point out about Zodtactics is all of these maneuvers and abilities become easier or even stronger if you tag commandos in and you actually have commandos and Zod working in tandem to accentuate all these powers and capabilities, right? So, I'm looking at chat real quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. I think so far it seems like my gets all agree. Your gets all agree, and nobody has anything extra to say. Thank you, Mark. What's up, Git? Yeah, he said Zod's OP. He's in every list. And you know what? At the time of this recording, I'm with you on that. Zod's making it on just about every list that I run. I really much like him. So I just want to say that any of you gets that haven't given Zod a try after this video, hopefully I've changed your mind. And I hope that you guys get stuck in with these Zod tactics. So there's one thing to keep in mind is don't cross our wall because we knock your teeth out. So please leave a like and subscribe because, you know, the orcs are struggling and so are we, but we could use your likes and subscribe. So I appreciate you gets. Let's get stuck in, lads, before I knock your teeth out.